This wasn't specifically tailored for you. This is a
McMinn.
evangelizing kind of a presentation I've done for, you know, more companies. The one I worked for, where I had to kind of build the whole initiative of why it's important to make something usable. And then I also did it at another company in the UK who had a similar process problem. But here's my background a little bit. So I have degrees in both, you know, computer science and psychology/communicative disorders, and so I've got that left brain, right brain mix, and so that's my thing, is to try to bring those together, those disciplines together in general in a corporate environment too. And I also I empathize with users a lot, because I generally hate technology and I'm not very good at using things, so I'm always swearing at my phone. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So. And most of my experience has been with, you know, application kind of things. I've not done a lot of web kind of things. We've done small web interfaces, but mainly it's been kind of complex applications that you need to really boil it down to something that's usable for something that's fundamentally very complex anyway. So so my experience is broad rather than deep. You know, I'm not a great programmer. I'm not a great human factors engineer. I'm somebody that's trying to tie all those disciplines together. So, and this is probably preaching to I'm just blast through some of these. This is a long presentation. So you guys probably know all this sort of thing. Basic definitions of what usability is. This one this is more the kind of thing that I'm dealing with currently at L3. So this is a hardware company that sells hardware for the most part. They've never really sold software. But the things that what the user interacts with is the user interface. So they've never really, before I got there, they really hadn't put a lot of effort into their user interfaces, and they were judged based on how poorly their user interface would work. There'd be this wonderful hardware that was very sophisticated, did all this great things behind the scenes, but they would go, oh, this one's not work very well, because the user interface would crash, and so they assumed the hardware was faulty. So we've been trying to instruct people that, you know, you're judged based on how usable your products are. People come away with an impression of your product and your company based on your user interfaces often. And this is, I think you guys probably all know this too. Everybody's expecting everything to be, you know, very easy. We deal with a lot of young military users. So you get a 19-year-old right out of high school who's trying to use a device that he has no idea, and he's expecting it to work like his phone, and he's not going to read the manual. I don't know how many of you have teenagers. Have you ever seen them use the manual for they don't even come with manuals now, the phones don't. So it's sort of an expectation that everything just works. So this is kind of the, you know, classic what people expect, and we don't want to give them this. This is something I think something I can address a little bit more. There are sort of several stages. I can say at L3 I probably started close to a 1 when we were there, because it was a very engineering-centric environment, and the discipline of human factors engineering specifically. So I was the first human factors engineer that they hired at L3, and it was kind of we were sort of sequestered off at the corner. You know, that wasn't really a real discipline compared to real engineering, but that has kind of changed as people have seen now what difference it makes. And the military is very, very interested in bringing that along, because sequestration is something that is on the table, and we're having to reduce budgets, and training costs are huge in the military. So it's very, very important, and we're seeing it a lot more in proposals. They're saying the GUI shall be easy to use. They don't quantify that, of course, so that gets a little tricky, but it's much, much more important than it used to be. So this is kind of the evolution, and I don't know, you are at a company, I don't know how many of you have experience in corporations, and if you've seen places where this where it would have fit in, but initially, you know, there are people that actually don't want to hear anything about it. They just want to do their own thing. Then you get the people that maybe have an interest in it themselves, and so they know how to make a nice user interface, and it works for them, and that's as far as they need to go. And then you might get a few projects in a bigger company that are, you know, doing it along the way, and then you get to the point where somebody decides this isn't important enough, where you can actually throw some money at it. So We've sort of slowly grown L3 to be part of that. Now it's bid as, you know, human factors engineering is bid in every proposal that has a user interface now. So it's expected, and they're part of the team. Every project that starts up, they're at the table at the beginning before we're kind of having to shove our way in, or they throw us in at the end. You know, we'll develop everything and then we'll just throw a user interface on at the end. That was the typical development model. So, and then official usability group. At this point, I'm the manager of a group of software developers and visual designers and human factors engineers, and we've kind of, nominally my name, because of the history of the group, they were called the Systems Application Group, but we've kind of pulled everybody who's doing any GUIs under one group, and I have permission actually to change us to the User Experience Group if I want. So we've kind of arrived to stage 5. We're trying to be systematic about it, but we haven't quite, we're still working towards these other goals. You guys probably, I don't know if you've seen this little drawing, but you know, it's kind of a classic one. You know, somebody probably had specs, you know, probably had specs for the handle and for the spout, and you know, but it didn't talk about what they needed to use it for. There was actually a case, it was a exercise company locally here, who, I was talking to somebody at a party who worked there, and he was telling me, yeah, we just went through this. He heard what I did. He goes, we could have used you at our company. We went through this whole design process, made this wonderful machine, and we spent tons of money on it, and it didn't fit through a standard door. So it just went nowhere. So kind of need to think about your application. So, and like I said, I think, you know, military budgets are very, very tight, so you can't really afford, in our business, to do things wrong the first. You've got to get it right the first time. So checking things out early. We're doing a lot of usability testing on mock-ups and that sort of thing early on to try to shake out issues.
Quick question. So are you working with, so I mean, I know with the military, are you spending time with people who are going to use it and getting their feedback? And
yes.
Is there a constant interface
well,
that way?
As much as we can, as much as, you know, we get to travel. I've gone out and watched people use our systems, and we have a lot of people who go out to the field who sometimes are our proxy users if we can't do anything else. We've also developed a relationship with the Air National Guard base across the street, who at least understand the military terminology, what some of the user scenarios are going to be. So we use them for usability testing. We bring them into our lab. We've got a usability testing lab even now. We've set up with Moray, and so we bring them in, and that's at least better than an engineer testing it. So
yeah, absolutely.
You know, but we have people with psychology degrees who are running our tests, who are doing some objective measurements with as close as we can get to users. We haven't actually done like remote user testing or anything like that. 'Cause that gets difficult in the secure environments. We can't bring cameras very often. When I have gone and observed for they call them JTACs, they're the guys that call in the bombs basically, and they got nervous by even taking notes.
Really?
So, you know, we can't really record. And
so that has to be a pretty, I mean, with those kind of requirements, that's creating a user interface that people are going to use, and that's got to be a really challenging, because you kind of guess at some point, no matter what, you're going to have to kind of guess to some degree. Right.
But it's helpful at least. They're solving enough of the same problems over and over again. You know, they have basic missions that they're trying to accomplish. So, you know, once you go and see what the problems that they have to deal with, and all of the crap that they have to carry, and all of the, you know, it's a very difficult environment that they're working in. So this is extremely important, and they're very appreciative of the efforts that we make to try to improve things. Part of the problem this is probably where I should cover up the camera, but it's going through. We deal with an acquisition people for getting our contracts. They're not necessarily representing the user in terms of the way the contracts are written. So we have to push sometimes and kind of sneak in usability language into the contracts and statements of work, because they're just the budget guys, and they don't necessarily know the end users. But the people who will end up using it, they're going to care. So we sometimes have to do a reach around to the end users and the customers, the ultimate customer, whereas the contract negotiations are being done through our program manager and a program manager on the government side. And so But it's getting to be much more standard, and there actually is some mill standards now that are being updated. The human engineering standard that it used to be a mill handbook, and now it's actually a mill standard. So it's getting to be a requirement that you have they call it human engineering, that you have processes in place.
So in all of your in all like defense contracts, you really are having that kind of skill.
It's not always called out.
Okay.
But we're starting to see it called out more.
More and more.
And the fact that they've actually made it a mill standard now is a huge deal. So it's recognized as something that really needs to be done across the board, I think. But yeah, it is challenging. We don't have the opportunity to do full usability testing with a complete array of users. A lot of times we do what we can, and then in the end we try to get out and watch them. Sometimes people will come in and we'll sell off our systems locally, and then we can see people interacting with it. But a lot of times our field service people or we have sort of application engineers kind of people, they'll sometimes they've been around the users enough where they know. And in the past they were sort of considered the human factors people, but then they were involved in the design enough where they weren't objective anymore. They would be evaluating their own design essentially. So I saw that one guy cherry picking the user feedback essentially. So he said he loved it. That's not what I heard. So I have notes written down what the guy said.
Hey Amy, before you go on, and I'm sorry about this, but we have time, hopefully, right?
Yeah, no, and most of this stuff you guys probably
so
already know for this presentation.
Yeah, maybe not. But with the user experience stuff that you're doing, how much of it do you think is, like in terms of just the interface with the screen and some sort of a keyboard, mouse, and how much of it is actually using some new piece of equipment, some physical thing that they have to manipulate in conjunction with software or whatever? I mean,
it's both. I mean, we have handheld devices, but we are looking at other means. So the military users have specific constraints. They have to wear gloves. They're holding a gun at the same time while they're trying to operate some of a handheld. They're trying to get video, and their night vision goggles maybe are involved, and so there are a lot of constraints you're dealing with military users. And I've dealt with medical devices too, where they were used in sterile operating rooms, and that was, so, we had, I think I used to talk about that as an example here, you had to be able to deal with blood splatter on a device. So, but we do, ergonomics is something we have dealt with to some degree, but generally my group is in the software department, and it's user interface oriented. But we're looking at different technologies, with touch screen there's touch screen and voice recognition, and those things are all kind of layers on user interfaces in general.
So if you're doing usability testing, though, I mean, it's your group that's going to be doing it, that you may be using this new technology that you can, okay.
New technology?
No, I mean in terms of a new interface technology, some way of entering information, or like having some sort of a requirement where they need to have a gun in their hands or whatever. That's the kind of testing you potentially could do?
Yeah. They don't usually have that written down specifically, although I think sometimes they will say it needs to be operated with gloves. They will have that kind of thing sometimes written in.
But if you're out in the field and you're observing, then you know that you have to accommodate that somehow.
Well, size, weight, and power is a big one. How long batteries last, because they're out on a patrol. These guys are already carrying, 80-pound packs, so any little bit of weight counts. So those are more the kind of, and does it fit with ergonomics, or does it fit into the cargo pocket of the military issue pants? So how are they going to, if they're carrying a gun and a radio on the other hand, and they want to view video, do you have something that drops down from their chest where they can look down?
So a lot of times that's partially spec'd, but you have to go and see how it's being, how the use might be in the field, and basically add those specs yourself.
Right. And sometimes we have issues with, I can skip through to some of these other things. You guys probably know all these. This was more, there's so many different terms that gets used, and they all have slight different flavors, and different fields embrace some versus the others. But
you like a user experience, though.
Well, that's kind of the new cool one, right? But nobody knows what that means.
That's what the best part about it, right?
People didn't even know human factors. Oh, you human resources? No, it's different. So it's an education process. But now people are throwing around these terms, more commonly. And I think there's there's an education that's been going on. I think this probably is, again, preaching to the choir.
Well, user engineering sounds good, because that sounds very official somehow.
What's that?
User engineering or usability engineering,
That's
right?
why I use that term for, it's got to have engineering in it to have that credibility in some circles. So, but I was focusing on user-centered design essentially, just to get people at least thinking about the users. That's the important part. We were talking about
How you were doing testing of different things,
Oh,
or trying
yeah.
to do
And so-
specs of, yeah.
the environment. So I get into that a little later in terms of understanding your user, understanding the environment that they're working in. So we have some places where it's out in the middle of the desert, bright sunlight and screens. You've got to be able to read a screen. So contrast of text on background is huge. So we do testing where we go outside and make sure that people can read the stuff outside. So those kind of environmental conditions we have to, and it may have to work at night and not blind them with their night vision goggles. So, you have to have those kind of conditions we do have to deal with. But they're not usually handed to us. Sometimes we have to kind of think through that on our own. So that's the job of this group, is to try to anticipate problems, because it's not always just handed to us. So this group, so the group that I've created, sort of pulling in, we've done some hiring and we've pulled from within the company too, but in general, this was advice I was giving to this other company that was trying to get, they recognized that they had some usability problems with their products, and they were trying to figure out how to get started essentially. And these are, in my mind, the required skill sets to have a discipline like this. You need to be able to talk on both sides. You need to be able to understand engineering language and, understand the constraints of budgets and schedules and what sales and marketing people are looking to make an appealing product. So being able to cross both of those it's a difficult thing, but there are a lot of people that are very good at being able to flip back and forth. And if people are totally in one camp or the other, it's very difficult for them to talk to get traction, because they're just going to be, stuck in their one world, and it's going to be difficult for them to make that connection. And you have to have an interest generally in your users. And sometimes if you have one person who's just designated, that's their job, is to look out for the users, regardless of what their role is or what their background is. Just somebody that you're tagged with looking out for the user, because everybody has their head down trying to do their job. The programmers are trying to get their user interface programming jobs done, and the marketing guys are trying to figure out how to sell the products, and everybody's got their agenda, and you need somebody who's looking out for the user, because that's often not really, it theoretically should be part of the marketing people's agenda, but sometimes they're more focused on making money than the users. So as long as you have somebody kind of dedicated to that, I think that's pretty key. Also, thick skin is pretty important, because user interfaces, everybody has an opinion. So you're never going to make everybody happy. You just kind of have to accept that. So, and optimism. I believe you can do it. Basically, you're looking for a balance. So if you, with all these different roles, if any one of those roles dominates it gets out of balance. And so it's really a matter of keeping the balance in that between the disciplines. So this is what I would say is the ideal UX team. So you've got, and they're going to be contentious forces a lot of times, and I see that all the time in my group. We've got, we generally have civil discourse, but everybody has, if you let one person if you let my cognitive psychologist dominate, he might get too carried away with, having all of the steps laid out, and if my visual design guy gets too carried away, it's going to look really pretty but may not be quite as functional. If the software folks take over, then it'll have all these cool features that they realize they could do, and so you just really have to get everybody together and working on the same page. So, and I don't know that you guys care so much about this. This is just sort of where I saw it fitting in with different development processes, but.
In the previous slide, the one where you see the triangle back here,
I think you can just hit the right button.
This one?
That worked.
The one
One
with
more.
the circles in it. Yeah, that one. Are some of these groups more difficult, more challenging to create comedy with?
Well, the graphic design, no offense, the artistic folks, but sometimes the software engineering folks can be just as touchy. So, not touchy, I mean, they just have a different orientation, but it was tricky at first, but now that they have worked together for a while, they really appreciate and understand each other's roles and contributions. And so I've had our visual design guy, and he's done some programming in the past. That was kind of a prerequisite in some ways for us, but he's now learning that, geez, if he makes this too hard, they're just not going to be able to if he designs something too glitzy, or glitzy is the wrong word, but he's got to at least take into account simplicity of execution of the thing. And the software folks have realized that they need to really get his input before they go off and decide what to do. So, and then the psychologist, he's actually really good at kind of negotiating everybody's, he calms everybody down, and that's his thing. And then we've got some people with, we've got somebody from the mechanical engineering department who actually doesn't work with directly in my group, but he's kind of he works with us a lot. He does a lot of helps us with the ergonomics. He and I kind of partnered initially when I very first started as this grassroots movement. He was one of the champions of it. So he's kind of, we watch each other's back. So if he hears something in the mechanical engineering department that's going on that needs human factors, and he alerts us to it. So, but yeah, there is it's I mean, you get different personalities in every field, but sometimes I've found it's a little trickier sometimes to deal with there are more opinions probably with the graphic design and industrial design folks, I think. And software folks kind of want to be told what to do sometimes, unless you're talking about software design. So see, here we're talking about user interface design, which is more of a visual thing. And actually sometimes where I've had contention is I've wanted to get these things sometimes more practically oriented. And visual design is one of those things where it's very difficult to assess how it affects usability. And it's not just, well, it looks cool, it has a big impact on how usability is, how usable something is. But they'll have somebody who says, well, they don't like that, or it looks too. We've had engineering groups who have kind of rejected some really stylistic things he's done, and because that's just gratuitous. But it actually has a function, and it's hard to quantify that. It's hard to have. So we've had to do usability testing to kind of prove that this design really does improve the performance. So I try to, instead of, if there are disagreements, I usually try to just go back to the data. If there are differences of opinion on one design versus the other, let's go test them. We've got the tools to do that. Let's send our psychologist will go evaluate it and come back, and generally the visual designer has been right. So not always, but most of the time. Let's see. So this is kind of, you guys probably don't, this is more just the background information to gather before you start out. Access to users, we touched on that a little bit, and just asking people what they want is not adequate. That's usually what people, well, yeah, no, we asked them what they wanted, and this is what they said they wanted, and that's not, people are not very self-aware, so we have to, and once you've shown them something that afterwards they usually go, oh yeah, I didn't even realize that was what I needed, but you're right. And we've tried to do a lot of observing of them in their normal environment as much as possible, but wherever we can.
So just as you put these teams together, which I think is it's really critical. I mean, here, even at the university, we run into the exact same problem. We have solutions, but also we often have to produce solutions looking for problems, right? And so, and obviously there's a lot of talk even in the academic environment about interdisciplinary type of projects. And there's not always a lot of trust between groups.
Yes.
And as you experience that as they start to work together, the industrial, the graphic design the engineers start to go, oh, okay. Now we've done this at their project, I trust you a little bit more, and when you say something, I'm not just going to blow you off. So do you see that kind of trust kind of?
Yes, yes,
kind of
and they learn from each other too.
Yeah.
So as some of the software developers have done GUIs with this visual designer who we try to create some sort of some templates and some libraries and we're trying to create a standard look and feel across our user interfaces as much as possible. Now that they've worked with him a few times, they can start to predict exactly what he's going to want to do anyway.
Really?
So and vice versa. So he's, the visual design guy is, well, I've got two of them now actually, and they don't always agree. That's so, but they're much more able to anticipate what stumbling blocks they might have with each other, and their ability to predict what is going to be successful is getting better. So, but it's I think and we have them. That's the other thing is that I haven't mentioned yet is we have everybody co-located. We've broken down the cubicle walls. We're the only ones there that have that right now, and we have a big open bullpen. Right now it's gotten too big. We got like 16 people in it with tables in the middle. They also play chess in the middle of the day once in a while, but so
or ping pong. You can do ping pong. Just so you know.
Yeah, we don't have quite that much room,
No.
but it's a very collaborative environment. So it's
Yeah.
kind of chaotic sometimes, but there's constant interaction. And so if they have a question, they want to run something by the visual design guy. How does this look? They're right there. It's can be distracting sometimes. We give everybody noise canceling headphones that they can check out when they need to, but that's been very important because we have a few people that kind of requested not to be part of that, and those are the ones that have been more likely to kind of go off and do their own thing, and then we find out at the end, oh wait, that's not really consistent at all with the rest of them. So,
but that environment, I'm really fascinated with that environment. It does sound like, it's something that's a really productive, creative way, and you can solve problems really, really quickly because you're all co-located. You can just start bouncing things off. You're playing chess, and you can start to have an informal conversation about a problem. Yeah, okay, interesting.
Well, it's also a place where people come now to, they know that, okay, here are all the GUI guys,
So they know where to go, where people just start to, so do you find that even other people outside your group start to gravitate towards this?
Well, people who need something from them, so there's always activity in there. It's almost too much so. So I think we initially, in our original building, we had 8 people or we call it the super cube. And now we kind of had 2. We grew enough where we needed 2 of them, and with the new location, they kind of just made one big room, and it's too many people, so it doesn't scale very well. So I was thinking the next round we could do some sort of like cloverleaf pattern or something, because people still want to have some degree of privacy,
but also that central location.
Have that central location. So and it happens all the time where somebody's talking about some problem they're solving, and somebody else overhears, oh, I solved that problem, last year already,
and here you go. Yeah. So it's really efficient.
It is. But it's also distracting. So it's not for everybody. Some people don't like that. It's too chaotic, and there's always a lot of conversation, and there's a lot of BSing sometimes too. It degenerates, and people are having fun, and so. But it's and sometimes people. In a typical engineering kind of a company or corporate environment where everybody's in their cubes and everybody's just sitting there typing, to somebody who's used to that, if they walk in and see all these people, it looks like a party going on, right? So they don't always see it as constructive work.
Sure.
So that's why we're sort of held to. We have to really prove ourselves.
But there's a lot of other companies like Google and Facebook and model who have that.
And I have to keep reminding people.
There's a lot of creative. Yeah, the reason why this is so fascinating to me is that here at the university, we have all these different capabilities, right? We have mechanical, electronic, we have software, and oftentimes it's getting people together. And sometimes this group's already solved this problem, this other group just doesn't know about it. So I'm fascinated about what you're doing because I think it's such an interesting. There's a lot of power there.
Yeah, there's a lot of efficiency gains that can be.
And even though it does look like people walk in and say, "Oh, there's a ping pong table," but there's a purpose behind trying to get people to come together, talk about their ideas. Yeah.
But it does have to be sort of managed too.
Yeah.
And I also have to constantly remind people that, they're not just in there playing. Because I do get a lot of comments from, well, and I have to remind people, if you're in the middle of, they play speed chess, where so it's 10-minute turnaround, right?
Yeah.
So, but I have to remind people, if you're in the middle of a chess match and somebody comes in and needs you for something, please
stop.
Because I had somebody
don't do this.
Right. So, but I had to remind the person that was complaining about it, studies have shown that people who take breaks during the day are more, more productive, so. But, so I do, it's a culture,
Culture
we're definitely
shift.
at the oddballs for the culture there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, James has a ping pong table. That's why he keeps on talking about ping pong.
Yeah.
And I think now I'm not going to put a ping pong table in this room over here because we want to keep that balance, right?
That's right.
ping pong's a little louder than chess, too.
Yeah.
It
A
is.
little more
Kids are flying
disruptive,
around.
yeah.
It's more of an equalizer, though.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
I'm not smart enough to play chess, so.
Well, they play some various other games, so, but, anyway. So this was again, you guys probably don't need this much, information on this, but this was more, my point is that, engineers tend to cater, they design a user interface that works well for them. They have to be reminded, this isn't for you, and that's the biggest battle I fight at L3 is this kind of design by committee. Well, they might need to do this, and they might need to do that. Well, but you're gonna make this giant thing that is really confusing, so we need to call it down to the thing they really need. And sometimes we are designing ones that are going to be used by engineers. Sometimes it is for our field service engineers or for our own engineers to troubleshoot on site. So in that case, yeah, we need to listen to that. So,
So you are like going to do minimalist, and oftentimes you're having to convince people to do minimalist function. Like, look, this is what the user. I mean, these are all cool, but this is what the problem we're trying to solve.
yeah,
This
and
minimalist function.
usually we have to do some compromises. We have to really pin people down because they're very uncomfortable with relinquishing control over every little feature in the system a lot of times. And so we'll say, now, are they going to really do this on a daily basis? Break it down. So how often are you going to do this? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Is it daily? Is it, what's the likelihood that this is going to arise? So if you break it down that way, and at least then we may have it, relegated to some back page, some weird function that they have to get to. It's not on prime, it's prime real estate are the main things we get debates about. So, but in some cases, you have systems where they do need, and it's not always just that you need to have fewer widgets on the screen. Sometimes a simpler interface can have more data on it because they don't want to have to do context switches. If they really need that much information, dealing with ultrasound technicians, I went and evaluated a bunch of different systems that they had. Most of their functions are on keyboards with all you would look at these big keyboards that had all these special functions. You go, it's got to be just impossible. But the one that would look the most complex was the one they liked the best because they knew where all the buttons were. They didn't ever have to look at it. They didn't have to change modes to get to another thing. Where the one I thought, oh, they would like this one. It's got fewer buttons, but it's all about functionality, whether they get their job done. And they're working, ultrasound technicians are working in the dark, so they need to be able to feel their way through stuff, and they don't want to have to look at a screen to go find out where this menu item is. So things like that. So this is why, know your user. That's really the key. And this was just an example of it. Back on that one, knowing your user. I worked with like some flight instructors that inside these domes and flight trainers, and they were all, after observing them, they were all ex-fighter pilots, but they were mostly like in their 50s, and they all had glasses, and they were mostly old guys, so the text needed to be small, or not too small, or it wasn't going to work for them. So here's an example of the lighting kind of situation we had to deal with. So obviously they're working around it by throwing a coat over their head to be able to see the screen. So. And they've got guns strapped on their legs, so obviously that's not a real. And looking at the psychological environment too, that's an important thing. If you're looking at something that's dealing with something that's going to be used in a battle situation, they're not going to have time to sit and ponder. So you need to make sure. And are they going to? And also, a lot of these, even if they're not battle situations, if you're looking at like a network operations center or military, they've got a zillion screens that they're dealing with, and all these different things that they're supposed to be monitoring at the same time, and it's just they're only going to be able to focus so much time on your task. So to make the assumption that yours is going to be the only interface that they have to deal with is a big mistake generally. So.
So when the psychologist talks, I mean, it's almost like cognitive tunnel vision or something, right? When the stress goes up and there's less processing going on. And have you created essentially with the cognitive psychologist sort of equations that correspond to how?
They're sort of rules of thumb, I think, as much as anything. I mean, they try to consider those things, and when we've gone, he's actually gone out and not to Afghanistan or Iraq. I mean, that's where the real. Well, we've gone to exercises that were being done in the States, and you know, he's asked people basically what they're having to, by observing them, but also, you know, he'll ask questions about what
they struggle with,
what they're thinking about, what issues they're going to, what their main goals in using whatever the device is, and so yeah, he thinks more about what the circumstances are that they're going to be dealing with. And we have people, you know, our systems engineers they should be thinking about that stuff too, and some are better than others. So it's not that hasn't ever really been considered at L3 at all, obviously, because it's been a very successful company. It's just, it's good to kind of be reminded of that once in a while. So, so this was an example from my previous medical stuff. You know, you had to be able to wipe down from bodily fluid splatter, and multiple people in the room, and sterile environment, high stress. Latex gloves was a big issue with touchscreens. And you get, this is again probably not that interesting to you guys, but just talking about task analysis and scenarios, and storyboard. Do you guys know about prototyping and storyboarding? I'm sure this is probably also preaching to the choir here. And we've been doing a lot more with prototyping, and we've found actually prototypes are a very good way to get a discussion going. If you're looking at designing a very complex system that is somewhat vaguely, perhaps you don't have all the requirements nailed down, doing a user interface helps people think about it. Even if it's, you know, they don't need the user interface that early in the project, it kind of frames the discussion. And it's amazing how many times we're in design reviews with the customer, and people have been going through all these, you know, diagrams and charts of software and hardware, and it's not until the GUI gets put up that people start talking about what the system is really going to need to do. And half the time, you know, it's not really talking about the GUI, but it's more talking about all the functionality underneath it, but it kind of helps frame the discussion. So people are starting to see that. So we're doing early prototypes more and more, knowing that, and we've had to push a little bit on who funds that too, because if it's coming out of our GUI budget and we know we're going to do an early prototype that's going to iterate a lot, we have to kind of say, you know, we're kind of doing systems engineering work here, guys. We're helping you do your job, you know, get a little extra funding, because people are now starting to realize the value of it. So it's been, and then, you know, help, and just gets people thinking through all the possibilities of things that can go wrong with it as well. I had on my notes here. So this is stuff you guys are probably aware of as well. We've mainly been doing lab-based. We haven't done much with the other methodologies, but this is, I like this one. That's great. Oh, and this is where probably you should take over. This was really meant for people who just have very basic skills in this. And I'm not an expert on this, so this was just kind of trying to touch on the high level things. And with that, I think that's my, yeah. This is kind of the how much do you want to expose versus how much do they need to be. Do you need to walk them through it, or do they need to be able to explore? Do they want to have that flexibility? You have to. This is again knowing your user to know what things that they're going to need to deal with, and knowing what other things they're familiar with too. That always helps. In the case with the flight instructors, they all loved Google Earth. This was a few years back, and so I knew anything that was in Google Earth, all those controls were fair game because they knew how to use them. So. let's see, yeah, this stuff is probably, again, you guys probably know this stuff, peeling back layers versus, so that's the trick we sometimes, we're talking about, how do you fight back on trying to keep minimal functionality, but still make everybody happy. So if there's some way for them to at least drill down and get what they need, then they're usually fairly content with that compromise. Again, organization, prioritizing, this is fairly standard stuff. I didn't see all your presentations, so I don't know if you already covered a lot of this stuff.
Not at all.
But, and let me know if you guys want to stop and talk about any of this thing. I think, how much time do we have?
Oh,
We've got a few minutes left.
well, a lot of times our discussions go long, so.
Quite a few slides here. So what we're trying to do too is at L3 is we've tried to come up with a fairly standard framework template that is flexible and can be reused for the various applications. And we're calling it the virtual radio, because most of our products are essentially big radios. They call them data links, but they're secure communication systems, but they mostly use RF, and it's our designer did something that looks like an old-time old-time military radio, and so we call it the virtual radio GUI design. So for those that are talking to the data links, it kind of has because they all have frequency controls and those kinds of things you'd see on a radio. So and that seems to work for people that have a little framework there. And then he's kind of taken that same style and applied it in other cases where it looks less like a radio, but it's got some of the same shading and some of the same controls that we reuse. And so people are starting to become familiar with that look and feel, and they can. And it's sort of a branding look too. They're trying to make it identifiable as an L3 GUI, and that being a good thing, not being identifiable as an L3 GUI because they look so bad. So, yeah, the corporate look and feel. I mean, these are, I'm sure you would probably be able to expand. So these are some bad design examples that I had from a previous company I was with.
Quick question, on the corporate look and feel, like how much does that ultimately influence everything? I don't know what you mean by corporate look and feel.
Not very much. So, right, well, it depends on where. At L3, not very much, because they really don't have much of a dictate on that. GE had a whole organization that was dedicated to their common user interface group. And you were told what colors, what fonts, what framework, everything. This is how your tabs are going to be styled. They had everything very, very controlled. But L3 basically has a red and white logo, and that's about all they really control. So, yeah, it's quite very. And Apple obviously is probably the ultimate control. So, yeah. And standards are a double-edged sword, obviously. You can go too far. But when I worked at GE, it was kind of nice to have that framework in place sometimes. But it made it difficult. So we were a company that had been acquired by GE, so we had to adapt all of our user interfaces to fit in with their corporate look and feel. And you knew at least that they had a very large group that had done a lot of research and used a lot of data to come up with that, but it wasn't very nimble. So if there was some newer control.
Well, because that was what I was going to ask, because I can see where it'd be comfort to have the framework, but then if you're bumping up against usability,
right,
and you're like, well,
so I've heard.
What's the point of having the corporate the standard if no one's going to use it?
Actually ran into the guy who's in charge of that group now at a conference, and he said they've actually kind of abandoned their standards in favor of basically having a good process to evaluate your user interface.
So that makes sense.
So I think they kind of accepted that you could be too rigid with the standard, and that you were basically because their user interfaces were not anything that looked really special, but everybody knew how to work with the GE interface. But after 10 years, that just means you look old school. So this other thing, now everybody's expecting everything to look like an iPad. So.
And most of those standards were developed far before we were doing any kind of work like that.
Well, because they take years to get agreement on. So
Exactly.
they're a very difficult thing to try to get in place. So, And that was what I, when I started at L3, I was kind of charged with, go make a standard, we need a branded look and feel, and that was something they really wanted to get going, and I tried to at least do a list of do's and don'ts, because there were a lot of rules that were broken, just basically, when to use check boxes versus radio buttons and things like that rules that are, you would hope most software engineers know, but a lot of them apparently didn't, and, misuse of toggle buttons and, fundamental things like that. I just try to cover some stuff like that, and I try to come up with sort of a color scheme, working with one of the visual design guys that I kind of borrowed, because I hadn't hired on my own yet. So, but since then, we've kind of evolved into adopting this other new, because if you bring in a different visual designer, they're probably going to want their own different look, essentially. But we needed to start with something, so we had one look, and we've kind of evolved it into a little. You've got to make sure you're adaptable, and that you can. Just sticking with the standard for the sake of sticking with the standard is not.
That's going to be hard to do these days with
Right.
competitive startups and everywhere else out there. Who are nimble.
Right.
Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense.
Well, and you've got to be able to adjust it if you find that it's not working in certain cases, and it can be tricky. But so we're not focused so much on. We're more focused on reuse too. So if you're reusing code and reusing the same design, then by that token, you're going to have standards. You're going to evolve. They're going to be evolving for the better, hopefully. But rather than have some book that says this shall be the standard, and we did have that published because I was asked to do that. So we did have a little usability guideline, and now we are trying to update that to include this new virtual radio look and feel, so that people who are now doing new versions of it can.
Do you want to get that?
I'm sorry, I should turn that off. Kill that here. There we go.
All right.
Sorry.
No worries. It's nice to hear the old BlackBerry sound.
Yeah, I know. I've got two phones. But, anyway, so this was a bad design example. So this was something that somebody threw together to look at 3D breast imaging. It was a 3D breast imaging system. Didn't have everything was just on one toolbar, and there was only one button. So we changed it so that at least I think I get too many rarely used functions, and so we cleaned it up a little bit. This was a little better design, that not for the same thing. This was a different company that I worked with, and this was used by biomedical researchers who were dealing with they're dealing with little mice CT scans to see if this drug is causing them to grow tumors or something. So, and they were mainly biology kind of degree people, so they weren't real computer savvy, and we had to make it fairly simple for them to do their job. But they were smart people, and they were doing a lot of manipulation with the image, and so you put the things on the right so that they kind of lines up with your. And they're very concerned with looking at this image and studying it. So a lot of things have panels on the left, but your mouse is on the right. So in terms of where you're going to line up with your view space, it made more sense to put the panel on the right. So things like that we were looking at.
It's like intelligent design.
And then this was one actually that I did my first version of it without having the nice icons, and our CTO said, well, where's the color and where's the, he thought I was a visual designer, so he thought hiring a human factors engineer that it was going to look cool, and I said no. So then we got a visual designer to help, pretty it up a little bit. So it was kind of an interesting learning experience. So I have to always go in and clarify, I'm not a visual designer, I'm not an artist. So yeah, this was kind of pointing out some of the good things about it. And then this is talking about design standards, and then we kind of touched on this a little bit. There are lots of different design standards out there, and they're categorized in different ways, and it does make sense to have some standards for user interaction methodologies, so that they can. I don't think it's happening though, unfortunately. And web interactions are all over the map, and there's really no governing body that's going to enforce any of that anyhow. So And this was, I talked briefly before about having this GUI guidelines, and that's what this is the kind of thing. Lexicon is important too, because we had many different products that did fundamentally the same things, but they all use different terms for the same thing. And so we at least try to, have a common set of terms. And that, so that at least a user going from one of our systems to another would know, okay, they didn't have to relearn the dictionary. This is the marketing could be replaced by human factors engineering in here, I think. The user interface is confusing, it's because you're stupid. And actually, I have a story from dealing with, we do these flight tests up on the roof where people are up operating our user interfaces on the roof for our systems while an airplane is flying around with one of our data links in it. And inevitably, I participated in a bunch of those when I first got there, and inevitably they'd lose a half a day, or if not a full day, because they couldn't figure out how to get the system set up through the user interface. And I was telling this story, and there would be like 5 engineers huddled around this going, what? And it would be because you had to set this mode to be able to click this button, and it was just horrible. And I was telling this story about having watched these 5 guys to I think he was a systems engineer, and he dead seriously, we just didn't have the right 5 people up there. Really? So, it's
It's a great example
it is.
of why we
And,
need
well,
you.
and there's sort of a macho thing too sometimes for people. Well, I understand it, so so I can go in and be the dumb human factors person. But yeah, it's this is just Q&A, man. And time is about right.
Yeah,
Because
I
we're
mean,
47
we probably could talk
slides.
about a lot of the slides that you flew through too, but.
Yeah, well, but I think if you guys have, sounds like I was preaching to the choir to some degree.
Well, we don't have classes in usability design,
Yeah, so
we
how
don't-
did this group end up getting started?
I called everyone.
I just showed up. I wasn't even invited. I just started showing up and just forced my way into it. And I'm also the loudest, so that's how,
I invited you.
Well, it's getting to be a bigger and bigger field in general. And human factors engineers are very marketable right now. If that's an indication, they're in demand now. And I was telling David that there was a period, we didn't have a human factors engineer job title at L3 until about a year after I got there. And we started hiring people and having to create a job title that fit their experience. And HR didn't really quite know how to pay them, and and it turns out they did a survey, and the salaries are exactly in line with software engineering. So if you get pushback from your software engineering students who think that this is a lesser skill and less marketable, they're wrong. So and actually the most powerful is a combination. If you have all those, if you have somebody, as I was hiring, I was looking for 2 out of 3. If I could get 2 out of the 3 of somebody who has visual design skills, human factors skills, and software engineering skills, then we were done. But you cannot find 3 out of 3 is next to impossible.
what you're doing is absolutely fascinating. It has so many applications. I mean, with what you're doing, we do work with a lot of startup companies. And the same advice that you're giving, we're doing the exact same thing with startup companies, or it's new technology saying, look, you can't just develop this in a box.
Right.
Because what's going to happen is you're going to go from A to Z, and you're going to get to Z, and you're going to find out that no one wants to buy it.
Well,
And what's the point?
It's the whole process of people are down in the trenches doing their thing, and they lose the perspective. And so you really need somebody who, either somebody comes in from the outside or somebody whose job it is to pull them up out of it once in a while. Remember what we're really trying to do here?
Yep.
It's really not that hard when it comes right down to it. You just have to have somebody. Sometimes I was telling them, sometimes you just have to have somebody dedicated to it. That's your mission, and that's been my mission at L3. It's not that I'm the best at that or anything. It's just that's been my job. So I have a very visible job in this company now, because everybody knows me as the GUI or human factors lady, you know, and the group has gotten a lot of credibility now, and people understand now that we've got to be included, and we're no longer sort of dismissed as, because when I first came, it was, yeah, that's a great opinion, but I like it this way, you know, I like red, or, you know, but now people are starting to realize, okay, these guys know what they're doing. And it's not me, you know, I've hired people that are much better than me at this stuff, so it's the group of them together as a discipline. And that's why it's very important to emphasize that nobody can do this really alone. It's a teamwork kind of thing. I was also talking about, I know the University of Utah has a game design program, and they pull in people, they form teams from the art and architecture department, and I think they have psychology in there too, and software people. And it's not that they're all supposed to do the same thing, they each have their own role on the team, but they work together to make a game. And they're getting their degrees from their various departments, but they're sort of forced together for the I think they do it like by a semester, where they do it, you know, a project for that semester. And it's been very effective. So I think their game design department is rated number 2 next to
I think it was actually just rated number 1.
Oh, was it? Really? Huh. And I've hired actually a couple people from that program. The one is an intern and one who graduated from there. Because the game design business is not really booming right now. But they have very good skills, you know. So that discipline has paid off. They've been very good GUI designers, and they work very well in this environment. And the one guy said, because we were talking about our supercube thing, and because we were talking about how we want to do it, we moved back to this new building. And he was saying, you know, when I came here, I just thought this is how all modern companies work. But then I go out and see all these cubes out in the rest of the building, and it's just weird out there. But that, you know, that's I think probably more unusual to have that kind of open.
Do you foresee L3 kind of being, when they look to hire people, that's going to be a bigger factor? Like this kind of, being able to work in these kind of team environments, is that going to be a bigger factor going forward, do you think? I mean,
it's interesting because they're still looking for certain skill sets. You know, they do a lot of embedded systems and low-level, you know, device driver kind of things. But in my group, certainly, you know, but what's interesting is they're just in the process of restructuring the group to be more component-based. They used to have things that were product line-based, kind of where we had all the satellite communication stuff in one group and all that. And so now instead, they're saying this because of the way they've seen this GUI group model working, because we're working across all those products, but it's a component. We're considered a component. You know, we also have an antenna group now that they're going to form, and a networking group. And they're talking about having all those people co-located, because right now everybody's very siloed in their little products. So they have, you know, and you might have 2 networking guys who are doing almost the same thing, and they never talk to each other. And that used to happen all the time with GUIs.
And that's the welcome to university, where you have one arm doing one thing. Like, hey, you guys, you're actually doing the exact same thing. And they're like, didn't even know that.
But so, you can kind of, and this British company I went to, they had this very, and it was a relatively small company, but they had the same thing going, and it's a very natural thing for people just to focus on their job. And in their case, the advice I thought, first just have a weekly meeting where you pull the GUI developers all together and share ideas, and you've got to force people together, because it's not people's natural inclination to go out and, you know, interface with other groups necessarily. So you've got to have some forcing function that brings them together, whether they like it or not in some cases. But and it doesn't even have to be any kind of formal process to do that. Just discussions, just go around and say what you're doing, in case, you know, Joe is interested in what Sally's working on. So just to interchange ideas, and you know, maybe they take turns presenting what they're working on, and do that kind of interchange. But
it is interesting because our students' lives aren't siloed. I mean, they take classes from all of us.
Yeah.
But our department curriculum and the agendas that we have within our departments are very.
And so you know, why I have not worked in academia, so I mean, this is a common thing everywhere, and I don't know why. Do you think is it sometimes in academia kind of competition for funding too? Is there some of that where everybody, this is mine, and so.
Well, and the university gets funds based on how many students they have. So, I mean, the students are all, you know, competing, which is silly because, you know, they take a few classes here and a few classes there, and they realize the benefits of
Right,
the
right.
variety of skills that they get from different.
Well, it should build up everybody if you do that kind of collaboration, so everybody should benefit, but, Yeah.
The academia doesn't really reward interdisciplinarity. There's no mechanism, really. So when I brought people together from across the university, I just knew that they all had interest in these areas. And really the whole point of bringing people together was to figure out, okay, well, how much visual arts and computer science and industrial design and business savvy and et cetera, that you need in order to talk about doing user interface design, and for what, you know, and maybe more in one case or another. So actually you're coming in at a very opportune time, because we've spent a whole semester sort of playing around with things, and we still got plenty we could talk about, like these guys in CS, we're going to talk about some of the, you know, the restrictions that, you know, you could run up against just in terms of coding, you know, basic development restrictions that you end up with. We talked in terms of using the eye for getting information and doing usability testing, but that's just one component of doing usability testing. So there's so much that, you know, can be explored.
Right, right. Well, I think that's part of what people have to just learn, realize what they don't know. I mean, that you don't know what you don't know, right, until you're exposed to what other people know. So maybe that's just our natural human ego to, you know, assume we have all the answers, but the more you're exposed to other disciplines, the more you realize I'm pretty limited in what I know. So
yeah, and to some extent, I'm hoping to break through whatever barriers we have. I mean, if we do anything at a university level, it probably needs to be centered somewhere in terms of pragmatically getting things to happen, but it should be able to tie into a whole bunch of different things. I'm not really interested in creating competing programs.
It probably helps if you have some focus or something you're trying to accomplish. You know, like that game design program, they had a specific thing they were trying to do. You know, you can do for smartphone apps, or you know, some other discipline like that would allow you to. Because if it's not really focused, it seems like it's going to be hard to keep people's attention and hard to try to bring people together around something. So it's almost like you need to pick some area that everybody would have a common interest in exploring, and put some energy into.
Yeah, and I think we mostly stayed with the idea of software here, but of course, you know, thinking in terms of, you know, physical objects and that connection to software, I mean, that's important too. And we do have industrial design folk here, you know, and so this. Yeah, that's a good point, though. I mean, it would be good to have sort of a focus. You did mention that psychology at BU has some sort of a minor, five-class minor or something.
It's a certification, they call
Yeah.
it. I think there are a couple of human factors engineering classes, and an ergonomics class, and a statistics class, and a cognitive psychology class. And if you've taken those 5 classes, you get a human factors certification. So, and because they don't have a human factors engineering degree per se, you know, people are getting a psychology degree, and you don't know whether it's, you know, clinical psychologist or, you know, so that allows them to say that they focused on human factors. So
one of the things that we've kind of run into, sort of channeling Rob a little bit here, he could probably speak for himself, but this, you know, a couple things. This, you know, we got an agreement with visual arts, for example, and yet we didn't have many people end up going over to that program, and it's almost like maybe that evangelistic aspect was missing at some level. And or the pay stub at the end that's potentially available.
what do you mean you didn't have people?
Well, we did a minor in graphic design, visual design.
Through computer science?
For computer science.
Yeah,
Just we
it's in
found
the-
that,
it's in the
we
catalog.
were weak on that side of the brain, and so we offered this minor with the idea that would help them be better at interface design. But honestly, I think the big problem, even this siloing that we have, is the students come to school to get a degree so that they can get a job.
Right.
And when you advertise for your positions, you say, I want a software engineer, I'd like you to have a bachelor's in computer science with, and so if we create a new degree called human interface, then they don't make it past your interfaces, it has to be a CS degree.
Right.
And so we've tried, like this art, and we've talked about a lot of combined degrees, and we even have something up here called just Bachelor of Integrated Studies, where they can pick 3 areas, and their bachelor's is, I want to do part art, part computer science, part something else, but then they go to get a job, and they say, BIS, I really don't know what that is, so no, you're not going to make it past the HR screening for the
We talked about this a little bit at lunch in terms of, those combined degrees. Computer science has a little more weight in the marketplace, especially right now. So these other ones are equally important, but as far as the marketplace goes, computer science probably gets more funding for projects from, so you guys are probably very well aware of that, more than psychology so there's sort of I certainly appreciate those, but in terms of the marketplace and in terms of sort of the status, in terms of the monetary rewards, computer science is going to trump psychology or art, clearly. Whether that's correct or not, that's the way it is. So
in an industry, we come together and say, we'd really like people that have this background. Would you form a degree to do that? So that we could recognize that. I think we'd be all over that, but the trouble is that cart before the horse. We can't really get students to get into a degree that they see at the end.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to ask for it. And yet what we're delivering is not really what you want exactly. We run into that all the time where they want a degree in computer science, but they're not getting exactly what they want because computer science is very software engineering oriented, not as much user interface. And
So the industry advisory board doesn't usually articulate requirements.
We have that. They want a bachelor's in computer science because that's what they know.
But the last industry advisory board that I went to, they did talk about the importance of user, L3 was.
Well, it is, but I mean a degree in user interface. If they can't say BS and CS on their diploma, then they feel like they have a problem, and they kind of do because that's what the employers are looking for.
well, it's a problem. It's an emerging field, so you
Yeah.
always have that problem. Computer science wasn't a degree, and it was electrical engineering originally, right? So,
Linguistics or.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary
physics,
process for the labels on these majors. So I think it may get there eventually, but I know I do hire a lot of computer science people because I'm looking for people who can program C# and Java and WPF and HTML but I want to know that they also have if anyone has these other skills, that's
And
a
how do
big
you
bonus.
identify it? I mean, are there?
My HR guys now learned. It took a while for them to learn how to filter for the things I'm looking for. 'Cause this was very different for L3. Because generally L3 was looking for embedded systems, real time, low level, bit twiddler kind of people. So we're very much an outlier in terms of the hiring profile there. So it took a while for them to figure that out. But
So what are you looking for specifically in terms of competency? If there's no human factors engineering, the same certificate that you, but is there?
well, for a new grad, if they've had a bunch of coursework and if they have projects listed where they've done a bunch of application or GUI work or new grads are probably different from people who've been out in the industry for a while, right? But and I don't even. One of my psychologist is one of my best programmers too. So for me, they don't have to have the computer science degree, but you're right, that does get them in the door through HR for the typical job posting, because they're posted as software engineers typically. But when we do hire human factors engineers too, and that's when it's much more broad with what kind of background they can have there.
So on a human factors job, when you list it in your education requirements, what typically do you have?
They can have psychology, industrial design, computer science even can, it's what are the other areas that the typical, those are the big ones. My psychologist also has a math degree, and that helped him get his foot in the door initially because it's sort of technical, so he can at least think in an engineering mentality. So, But yeah, it is kind of tricky, so I don't know that you're not doing the right thing by sticking with computer science, but just to make sure that they're prepared for the real world and for dealing with, I think the team kind of environment is getting to be more and more common for successful companies. So, you know, companies in Silicon Valley are often structured that way now. So Salt Lake City is probably not quite, you're not seeing that quite as often, but some of those smaller companies I've worked for have had more of an open environment.
And maybe that's what has to happen in an academic unit for it to really be successful. And of course, this is not your job to figure out how we solve, you know,
Well,
academic problems.
it's a common problem. It's
Maybe
not,
we should hire the visual arts person into computer science or something, or a cognitive psychologist into computer science, or whatever, or into, you know, you guys, NTM,
Well, I think
whatever, you know.
getting them together though to work on a project together
Yeah.
would be very valuable. You know, pick something.
That'd be a
an
good
iPad
start,
app.
something.
I mean, do you guys do that? Do you guys do much work with that in computer science and?
We have,
You do
over the years,
applications?
collaborated with some more, you know, typically, as you know, computer science people make ugly stuff designed for them, and so when we do outside, we have capstone courses where we do outside projects, and we usually have to bring in somebody from art because we just can't make stuff with them.
Right, right.
And,
Or some educational software, or just, you know,
and we
pick something.
collaborate some in those capstone projects,
Yeah.
but I think they could use more coursework along that line. In other words, I don't know, they don't have to take a psychology class even to get up. They could take another area.
One of the electives, yeah.
So if we start
Broadening it would be
requiring
good.
some of those, so they get that aspect of it would be good.
Because some of the problems we've had with the software engineers who have more of the traditional, I was a software manager at Evans and Sutherland over a more traditional route for flight simulators there too, and people that could communicate either in written form or, you know, verbally, somebody who can look somebody in the eye and have a conversation, sometimes that was the problem. And people have a tendency just want to sit and program in their cube and not talk to the guy next to them, and that creates all sorts of problems. So, and thinking about who's gonna use it. So there's the business aspects too, you know, understanding budgets and schedules and the constraints there, and return on investment, and just making people more well-rounded in general is always a good thing in my mind. So
It'll have to evolve, and you know, we feel it, at least I do, when we talk to our industry advisors tomorrow, but it's hard to turn it around. For instance, we're working with ABET accreditation right now, and ABET's good for a lot of reasons, but if you put all the ABET ones in there on the
Yeah.
technical side, there's no room for
right.
anything else. So as soon as we start moving to ABET, we're gonna move even further away from the
Does
stuff
that-
that you need.
What does that get you? Does that really help you much? And why are you
I
doing
don't
it?
know, I don't know.
Well, we may not do it.
Yeah.
There's, in academics, it's, I don't know. I'm.
Well, for engineering, ABET accreditation is required. In CS, it's kind of new,
Yeah.
comparatively.
Yeah.
I mean, the only real value would be if we were doing something government or military that would
For
require
instance, the
that.
base, the Air Force is interested.
They require it.
They
Okay.
require
Yeah.
that. And, but that's for their, you know, bit twiddling engineering type jobs.
Right.
Whereas most of our graduates, well, we place a lot of three,
Yeah.
a lot of people out there, and most of them now are ending up doing something web or mobile.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, again, ABET maybe needs to move, and I think we need to move. At least
Yeah,
I feel that.
Those accreditation agencies probably are a little slow to evolve. It's like standards, you know, it's,
Just what you described earlier.
It's probably difficult. Can you make sort of two different tracks? One that's accredited and one not, or
That's
just
what I
work that
thought.
way?
I thought we could do
Yeah,
that.
we try it, but it's hard because of the funnel, you know, the lower division core classes.
Yeah.
And trying to fan out. But yeah, and we tried a game, for instance, we tried a game developing major. And the problem was if they didn't get a job in game development, even though they're highly skilled, because that was a tough major, they couldn't get past HR with a game development degree.
Yeah.
No emphasis.
See, I value
Because they
that
just had,
myself.
yeah. And other places just say CS or equivalent, and then you have to try to make your case for why game development is equivalent.
Well, Well, I suppose if we created a sort of recognized certificate, I mean, if the U is creating a certificate, then it becomes sort of established, and we did something similar and it was established, and we have our industry partners and we're sort of promoting it, and that actually helps you in
And
a
people are
sense,
getting
right?
jobs
It's like,
with this psychology, I mean, how many undergraduate psychology majors usually are getting jobs these days, But these guys who have this human factors certificate are getting jobs. So,
yeah.
with a bachelor's degree.
If we get a company that would get behind that, and we could get behind it kind of simultaneously, then we could maybe try.
I like the project approach too. That's an interesting idea. We could be doing. We have done stuff across the discipline, but thinking in terms of process, like actually building across the discipline. That's kind of fascinating. If we could get enough people, everybody's always busy, but if there's interest,
But you have
like the
senior
people that are in this
projects
room
and
right
things,
now.
So, if senior projects were required to work with people from,
Yeah.
a couple of other departments and create something together.
It's a good idea. It's almost 3. Not everybody's got a chance to ask a question. Does anyone want to?
I think it's more just an observation, but I mean, when you had mentioned, it's nice to see, or you concretely talk about the way that you're trying to help your company develop an appreciation for user interface design. And that one of the things that work well, it's not just sort of this vague sense of team building or being team oriented, that one of the processes that you observed was that people would come together and start to appreciate the perspectives of people from other disciplines, which strikes me as, that's maybe partly, as we're talking about, well, how can we sort of develop those same types of skill sets here in a more sort of disciplinarily oriented environment, and maybe that's part of the purpose of the Gen Ed program, is to help people understand the perspectives of other disciplines. But if we can be just more aware of that, concretely aware of how that's an important skill to develop. I mean, it's just nice to know that.
Well, and to actually to see the value in it. Maybe I've gotten lucky too that we've hired some really good people. Because I was also telling you, it's not all. I've worked with some kind of human factors engineers that were really not any value added. So I've got a really crack team, and so I think that has made an impression as far as that's why people are accepting them, because they are producing. So it's all about, are you just sitting there with somebody and talking isn't, but if you can actually see them working on something and seeing them help produce something that you have a common end goal. So if you had a project where people